I have one message. Alberta has had enough.
You can just imagine what would happen if Alberta separated and tried to be an independent country. It wouldn't matter if Canada was sabotaging its own living standards in order to sabotage Alberta's.
Elbows up, Team Canada.
Because quite frankly, what we've seen with this elbows up nonsense is that Canadians are prepared to do that.
And then what happened to you because you had the flag up?
We got a rock thrown through the window, our cars vandalized, and
Canada is in trouble, and Alberta could separate from Canada as more and more people are sick of the federal government, and they know that they are not represented well at all. As more and more people have come out and now said they want Alberta to separate from Canada.
So, to the new Prime Minister and the Liberal Party, I have one message. Alberta has had enough. Enough with Ottawa trampling over our provincial jurisdiction like Canada's constitution doesn't exist. Enough with the meaningless virtue signaling climate policies that only make Canadians poorer and threaten our energy security. Enough of their screw the West, we'll take the rest mentality. Enough with their soft on crime policies that let repeat offenders roam the streets on bail. Enough with their unsafe supply, their open border policies, their censorship laws, the list goes on and on.
We're going to discuss what would probably happen if that happened, and we're also going to discuss how we got to this point. The fact is, the economy in Canada is a total train wreck and disaster. Canadians just voted for the same government that has absolutely decimated the economy over the past decade. The same government that invoked the Emergencies Act and turned the country into a literal dictatorship and turned on its own citizens who were participating in a peaceful protest. And since then, it's also been deemed illegal. But who's gone to jail for it? None of the politicians who were involved with it. In fact, they've been rewarded. They've been rewarded with actually continuing to be in power. Because if you look beyond the bankster Mark Carney, you've got the same clowns that are behind the scenes, and this really is just a show of what a complete fucking disaster Canada is in right now, and the economy and the middle class have been completely hollowed out. And a place where this has been especially felt is in Alberta. Alberta has been completely hollowed out, despite what you might read on the headlines that Alberta is recovering. If you actually see what's happened to the economy, well, living standards have been collapsing since 2014. The Liberals were elected in 2015. Mark Carney is planning to block more pipelines, block more energy infrastructure, and impose an industrial carbon tax that will make Alberta an uncompetitive place to produce commodities. And really, the fact that the West is being isolated by the Liberals themselves is the fact that there is growing sentiment to leave Canada and the Canadian Confederation. Now, there's two options when it would come to doing something like that, and I just want to say that I think a referendum will be on the table within the next 4 years. It will probably be part of the mandate during the next election cycle in Alberta. But if there is a referendum election, the choice would obviously be between Alberta becoming an independent country or Alberta joining the United States. Now, I think that Alberta becoming an independent country sounds like the best option because, let's face it, the United States is a declining nation as well. You just have to look beyond the veil of the broken GDP per capita statistics that most people point to. Yes, on the whole, the US has higher living standards than Canada, but it is widely skewed by people at the top. And when I say people at the top, I'm talking about the top 1%, not the top 10%. So they make the GDP per capita numbers look a lot better, and that's often what you see in comparison to Canada when it comes to GDP per capita. Now, that also does not account for the wealth inequality, and the wealth inequality in the United States is one of the widest in the world, and that's part of the reason why Donald Trump was elected in the United States. It's part of the reason that the United States is falling apart as we know it, and I would highly recommend that you read a book by Ray Dalio called The Changing World Order, which details more about that and the history. Alberta joining the United States would likely be a step forward to go backwards again. But the real question is, could Alberta become an independent country? If Alberta was an independent country, it would have to significantly expand the size of government, and then it would need more money, which would mean it would have to increase taxes, and the lack of federal taxes would mean that there would be scope to actually do that. So it is viable for Alberta to become an independent country. The problem is Alberta is extremely connected to Canada, and Alberta is also very isolated when you look at a map. If you've ever drove 6 hours in any direction from Calgary, you'll quickly realize that there aren't many major cities that are close by, making trade actually very difficult, relying on critical infrastructure, which would take time to be built. So even though I like the idea of Alberta becoming an independent country, I actually think in practice it could actually be a disaster, exactly like Brexit in the UK. Because the thing is, what we've already seen with the elbows up gang in Canada is if you look at what people are prepared to do in order to just virtue signal or in order to try and stab somebody in the back, especially Alberta, which most liberals frown upon anyways, you can just imagine what would happen if Alberta separated and tried to be an independent country. It wouldn't matter if Canada was sabotaging its own living standards in order to sabotage Alberta's.
Alright folks, I'm in Metro right now. You gotta check out these strawberry prices. Strawberries from the US. Take a look at that, $2.44. Strawberries from Canada, $6.99. Elbows up, Team Canada.
Because quite frankly, what we've seen with this elbows up nonsense is that Canadians are prepared to do that. So that puts Alberta in a potentially sticky situation. And another problem is what they would do with their currency and how they would continue to use the Canadian dollar or whether they would adopt the US dollar, how that would impact the government and the government's funding, and what would all that mean for the economy. There are so many things that aren't clear at this stage. But one thing I think that is unfortunately clear is that the only path that I can see as a viable option for Alberta to separate from Canada is actually by joining the United States and becoming the 51st state. And the problem is Canadians are likely not going to vote for that, even in Alberta.
And then what happened to you because he had the flag up?
We got a rock thrown through the window, our cars vandalized,
And the problem is if they choose to become an independent country, like I said, they're not just going to face attacks from Canada, they will likely face attacks from the United States as well. So there's a lot of different dynamics that are at play here, and there's a lot of hopium that goes on, and people are idolizing the imaginary idea that Alberta will become an independent country and everything will be okay. The fact is, when you look at Alberta's economy, it is highly boom-bust, and it's been highly boom-bust since the 1970s. Numerous governments have squandered cash and they haven't saved anything. So the fact is, even though Alberta becoming an independent country sounds like a great idea, in practice it might be a total disaster. And that might be the case even though people like me actually would think, yeah, I would want Alberta to become an independent country. But I don't think that that would end up with Alberta's living standards going up. I would also say that a lot of people who have hopium and are planning to move to Alberta, they would be better just channeling all their energy towards leaving Canada entirely. Because honestly, what is the point in spending all the time, all the money on moving to another province to find out in 4 years they vote on a referendum and decide to not separate from Canada anyway? I mean, it would just be a total waste of time, and we only have so much time on this planet, and it's better to not be spending it in places that are in complete decline and outright depressions like Canada is heading into. Canada is already in a lost decade, and we know that Mark Carney is just going to continue this because he isn't pushing pro-capitalist policies, he's not pushing pro-market policies, and unfortunately the very people who put Mark Carney in power, boomers, are going to feel the most of this pain. You're going to see a lot of policies that weren't even part of Mark Carney's election platform that will be coming in the House of Commons over the next couple of years. And if you want an example of what these policies look like, I suggest you look over to the UK UK, where Keir Starmer has done this exact thing. He basically rose to power saying that he wasn't going to increase taxes, saying that he was going to do all these things to make the economy grow. The economy's still not growing. He's increased taxes and he's increased regulation and red tape, and the financial burden on the country is now worse off than before he was in charge. So the fact is, for people who want to move to Alberta, the best option is, if you can, boycott Canada entirely and leave the country. Because the fact is, the ruling elites have realized that more and more people are trying to leave, and the probability that they put more things in place to make the cost impossible for people to bear who do try and leave is going to increase and increase and increase. And I think that's really what you're going to see. These people aren't going to incentivize people to stay in Canada. No, 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 no. These people will try and drive up the cost so much for people to leave that they won't be able to. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend you check out this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN, if you're staying in Canada, you're going to bloody need one, then go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. They're already talking about banning X, link in the description. I will see you in the next one. Take care.